Crooklyn cast, 1994 vs. 2026. Then and now, what they look like, 32 years later. Before nostalgia softens the truth, remember this? Crooklyn wasn't a fairy tale, it was a mirror. Behind those childhood smiles were careers that stalled, lives reshaped by illness, marriages tested by pressure, and talents the industry quietly moved past. 32 years later, some faces aged under bright lights, others disappeared without headlines, and a few never got the chance to grow old at all. What they look like now may surprise you, but what they survived may shock you even more. Stay with us. Watch until the end, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for stories time tried to erase but never could. Alfre Woodard. Alfre Woodard brought a rare kind of gravity to Crooklyn 1994, one that didn't rely on dramatic speeches or grand gestures. Born on November 8, 1952 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Woodard was already a seasoned performer when she portrayed Carolyn Carmichael, the exhausted yet disciplined mother holding a chaotic household together. At 42 years old, she embodied a woman stretched thin by responsibility, loving strict and emotionally guarded, reflecting a generation of black mothers whose strength was often demanded but rarely acknowledged. Her performance anchored the film in realism, making the children's world feel lived in rather than staged. By the time Crooklyn was released, Woodard's career had already been shaped by resistance. Despite early acclaim, including an Academy Award nomination for Cross Creek 1983, she repeatedly encountered an industry that limited black women to narrow emotional lanes. Rather than benefiting from momentum, she was forced to negotiate for complexity in nearly every role. Projects like Passion Fish, Miss Evers Boys, and later Clemency required her to carry moral conflict, grief, and historical trauma on screen, often without the visibility or compensation granted to her white peers. Her talent was undeniable, yet progress came slowly and unevenly. At the same time, Woodard was building a personal life under constant pressure. She married writer-producer Roderick Spencer in 1983, and their marriage endured for decades despite demanding schedules, location shoots, activism, and parenting. Woodard has spoken candidly about the toll of balancing family stability while being one of the few consistently employed black actresses of her era. There was little room for rest. Each role carried not only artistic weight, but also representational responsibility. As the years progressed, the emotional cost of repeatedly portraying pain became clearer. Woodard has acknowledged the psychological fatigue that followed projects rooted in real historical suffering. Yet she continued expanding into producing and activism, co-founding artists for A New South Africa, and remaining deeply involved in humanitarian causes. Unlike many peers, she never retreated from engagement, even as the work demanded resilience rather than reward. By 2026, Alfre Woodard is 74 years old and still active in film, television, and long-form development. Her estimated net worth, approximately $8 million, reflects longevity rather than blockbuster dominance. More importantly, it reflects a career built on restraint, discipline, and moral clarity. When audiences look at her now compared to 1994, they see not just an actress who aged, but a woman who endured, quietly shaping American cinema while refusing to be diminished by it. Zelda Harris. Zelda Harris entered American cinema at an age when most children are still learning how to understand the world around them. Born on February 17, 1985 in New York City, she was only 9 years old when she stepped into the role of Troy Carmichael in Crooklyn, 1994. The performance was not loud or theatrical. Instead, it was observant, restrained, and emotionally precise. Troy's eyes carried the film's weight, watching adults struggle, siblings clash, and innocence slowly bend under responsibility. Critics later described her work as one of the most truthful child performances of the 1990s, not because it demanded attention, but because it never tried to. Following Crooklyn, Harris briefly remained visible in Hollywood. She appeared in The Babysitter's Club 1995 and later in Spike Lee's He Got Game 1998. Yet unlike many child actors who chase momentum, her career did not accelerate. Casting opportunities narrowed quickly and the industry's interest in her age group faded as predictably as it had arrived. There were no public scandals, no dramatic breakdowns, only a quieter, more common reality being celebrated for a moment while the industry moves forward without explanation. If Hollywood had offered her stronger roles as she grew older, would her path have looked different? Instead of clinging to a shrinking spotlight, Harris made a deliberate pivot. She chose education over auditions, stability over uncertainty. She enrolled at Princeton University and graduated in 2007, an achievement that quietly redefined her story. At a time when many former child actors struggled to separate their identity from early fame, Harris consciously built a life outside of it. She pursued teaching, became active in education, and developed her musical interests playing piano and saxophone, and briefly performing with a band. This chapter of her life was not about reinvention for applause, but about structure, purpose, and control. By 2026, Zelda Harris is in her early 40s, living far from Hollywood's machinery. She works as an educator and musician roles that offer continuity rather than volatility. Her estimated net worth is around $500,000, largely stemming from her early film work. While modest by celebrity standards, it reflects a career that did not chase excess or visibility at any cost. What makes Harris's legacy unusual is not what she became, but what she refused to become. She did not spend decades trying to relive Troy Carmichael. Instead, she allowed that performance to remain intact, preserved in time. For audiences revisiting Crooklyn more than 3 decades later, her face still reflects childhood truth. Behind the scenes, her real success lies in choosing a life defined by intention rather than expectation. A rare outcome in an industry that rarely allows child stars to grow up quietly. Carlton Williams. Carlton Williams appeared briefly in Crooklyn 1994, yet his presence left a gentle imprint that still lingers decades later. Born on December 29, 1978 in New York City, Williams was just 15 years old when he played Clinton, a neighborhood kid whose easy smile and basketball energy added movement and warmth to the children's world. The role felt natural, rather than performed less about dialogue and more about presence, capturing the everyday rhythm of Brooklyn youth without drawing attention to itself. Unlike many young performers, Carlton Williams never pursued a follow-up acting career. This was not a case of rejection or lost auditions. His life moved in a different direction, shaped by health rather than ambition. Williams lived with sickle cell anemia, a genetic blood disorder that causes severe pain episodes, chronic fatigue, and life-threatening complications. As he entered adulthood, managing his condition became a daily reality. Hospital visits. Physical exhaustion and unpredictable pain replaced the routines of auditions or training, quietly closing doors that audiences never knew had opened. The contrast between memory and reality is striking. On screen, Clinton feels carefree and physically alive, running, laughing, moving through summer days with ease. Off-screen, Williams's body demanded constant endurance, acting which requires long hours, emotional stamina, and physical reliability became increasingly impossible. While his performance in Crooklyn reached millions of viewers, it remained his only credited role not by choice, but by circumstance. How many promising lives disappear from the screen not because of talent, but because the body itself refuses to cooperate? As his condition progressed, survival became the priority. There were no comeback attempts or public struggles played out in the media. Financial stability never followed his brief exposure. His income remained largely tied to Crooklyn with no sustained career to support long-term medical care. Unlike child actors who vanish into anonymity by choice, Williams's absence was imposed quietly without scandal, without headlines, and without the industry noticing. Carlton Williams died on November 28, 2003, at just 24 years old from complications related to sickle cell anemia. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was approximately $50,000, a modest sum, reflecting a life interrupted rather than a career abandoned. His passing went largely unnoticed outside of close circles, even as Crooklyn continued to be rediscovered by new generations. Today, looking back from 2026, Williams's story stands apart from the usual child actor narrative. There was no rise and fall, no reinvention arc. Instead, there was a single moment captured on film, a reminder that some legacies are measured not by longevity, but by the honesty of a brief appearance. In Crooklyn, Carlton Williams remains forever young, moving freely through a summer that real life never allowed him to revisit. Delroy Lindo. Delroy Lindo brought a raw, unsettling realism to Crooklyn 1994 that refused easy sympathy. Born on November 18, 1952, in London to Jamaican parents, and raised partly in the United States, Lindo was 42 when he portrayed Woody Carmichael, the volatile, emotionally distant father whose presence defines the household's instability. His performance didn't soften the character or seek redemption. Instead, it exposed how frustration, unspoken disappointment, and economic pressure can calcify into anger. For many viewers, Woody was uncomfortable to watch because he felt painfully real. At the time of Crooklyn, Lindo was already respected within theater circles, yet Hollywood success remained inconsistent. Films like Malcolm X 1992 and Clockers 1995 brought critical attention, but not sustained momentum. As a black immigrant actor navigating American cinema, Lindo often found himself praised yet postponed, recognized for craft while opportunities lagged behind. Financial uncertainty and constant relocation placed strain on his first marriage to Kathy Cohen, which eventually ended. The instability wasn't just professional, it seeped into personal identity, shaping the intensity audiences would later recognize as his signature. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Lindo's work oscillated between scene-stealing roles in films like Get Shorty and The Cider House Rules, and long stretches devoted primarily to theater. Despite a Tony Award nomination, mainstream visibility remained elusive. The irony was sharp, his skill deepened as his profile stalled. Those years refined his ability to embody characters carrying suppressed rage, regret, and moral exhaustion, qualities that never faded, only waited. The answer began to surface decades later. In 2020, Lindo delivered a career-defining performance in Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods, unleashing years of internalized fury and grief with ferocity and precision. Critics hailed it as a revelation, though many noted the injustice of such recognition arriving so late. The role reframed Lindo not as a supporting presence, but as one of his generation's most formidable actors. Subsequent work on The Good Fight and other selective projects reinforced that reassessment. By 2026, Delroy Lindo is 74 years old and working by choice rather than necessity. He remains selective, favoring depth over volume, and has expanded into writing and mentoring particularly projects tied to Black British and Windrush histories. His estimated net worth is approximately $4 million, a figure that reflects endurance more than acceleration. Looking back from Crooklyn to now, Lindo's transformation isn't merely physical. The hardened father, once shaped by frustration, has given way to an artist defined by patience, discipline, and earned authority. Time didn't soften his edge. It sharpened it, finally allowing the industry to catch up to the power he always carried. Isaiah Washington. Isaiah Washington entered Crooklyn 1994 at a transitional moment in his life and career. Born on August 3, 1963 in Houston, Texas, Washington was 31 when he appeared as Vic, a neighborhood boyfriend orbiting the Carmichael family's adult world. The role was small but important. It placed him inside Spike Lee's universe as a figure shaped by adult tension rather than childhood innocence. Vic wasn't aspirational or heroic. He felt real, present, flawed, and emotionally loaded. For Washington, It was an early step into character-driven storytelling that valued realism over spectacle. Throughout the 1990s, Washington's career advanced unevenly. He appeared in films like Out of Sight 1998 and Romeo Must Die 2000, building visibility without consistency. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Long periods between roles, constant travel, and uncertainty weighed heavily on his personal life. He married Janissa Marie Washington in 1996, and like many actors still climbing, he carried professional anxiety into the marriage. Ambition became both fuel and strain, turning success into something fragile rather than secure. His breakthrough arrived in the early 2000s with television. Cast as Dr. Preston Burke on Grey's Anatomy, Washington finally reached mainstream recognition, financial stability, and cultural visibility. The role transformed his public profile almost overnight. Yet the rise was followed by a fall just as sudden. In 2007, a highly publicized on-set incident ended his run on the show and reshaped his career trajectory. Opportunities evaporated quickly, and his reputation hardened in ways that proved difficult to reverse. When controversy defines a person's name, does the industry ever allow room for genuine rebuilding? In the years that followed, Washington stepped away from Hollywood's center rather than waiting for institutional forgiveness. He pursued independent filmmaking on demanding roles such as Blue Caprice 2013, which required emotional restraint and moral complexity rather than likability. He returned to television with The 100, proving his ability to anchor long-form storytelling again. At the same time, he expanded into authorship directing and production, seeking control over his narrative instead of dependence on casting decisions. Washington also reframed his public identity through projects outside traditional acting. He hosted a travel and cooking series and became increasingly involved in humanitarian work connected to Sierra Leone, where he explored ancestral ties and community development. These efforts marked a shift from celebrity toward purpose, emphasizing contribution over visibility. The process was slower and quieter than his earlier rise, but it was deliberate. By 2026, Isaiah Washington is 63 years old, working primarily on independent terms. His estimated net worth is around $500,000, reflecting a career interrupted and restructured rather than continuously rewarded. When audiences compare his image from 1994 to now, the transformation is not just physical. It is the story of a man who experienced rapid ascent, public collapse, and a long private rebuild, one that replaced applause with endurance. Francis Foster. Francis Foster arrived in Crooklyn 1994, not as a rising star, but as a lifetime of experience distilled into a few unforgettable scenes. Born on June 11, 1924 in Yonkers, New York, Foster was 70 years old when she portrayed Aunt Song, the family elder, whose quiet authority anchors generations. She didn't command attention with volume. She commanded it with presence. Every pause, every look carried the gravity of someone who had lived long before the camera ever noticed. Long before Crooklyn Foster's career unfolded against structural barriers rather than personal limitation. She came of age professionally in the 1950s and 1960s, when opportunities for Black actresses were scarce and often demeaning. Film and television rarely offered sustained work, so she built her reputation where excellence could not be ignored: the stage. As a co-founder of the Negro Ensemble Company, Foster helped create space for Black artists to tell their own stories with dignity and craft. Theater became not a stepping stone, but a lifeline, artistically rich, financially uncertain, and relentlessly demanding. Despite her stature in theater, screen roles arrived sporadically and late. Appearances in films like Malcolm X 1992 and Clockers 1995 brought prestige, not security. Even acclaim could not undo decades spent proving worth in rooms that rarely expected it. Foster also directed and taught, expanding her influence beyond performance. Yet recognition lagged behind contribution. Awards came slowly, often framed as lifetime honors rather than acknowledgement of ongoing excellence. Her personal life carried its own weight. Foster married Robert Stansfield Foster in 1941. The marriage lasted until his death in 1977. Years later, she married Morton Goldson, remaining with him until her own passing. These relationships unfolded alongside an unforgiving professional rhythm, rehearsals, touring productions, teaching, leaving little space for rest as she aged. Even in later years, retirement was not an option easily afforded. In Crooklyn, Foster's aunt's song felt like memory itself, measured, observant, unshakable. The role did not reinvent her career. It confirmed it. She returned once more to Spike Lee's world in Clockers, then continued working despite declining health. On June 17, 1997, Frances Foster died at 73 from a cerebral hemorrhage in Fairfax, Virginia. She was laid to rest at Pine Lawn Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York, following a Harlem memorial that honored her cultural legacy. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was about $300,000 earned across decades of theater, film, and directing. Measured against impact, it was modest. Measured against endurance, it was honest. Today, looking back from 2026, Frances Foster's face in Crooklyn reminds us that some greatness doesn't seek the spotlight. It survives it. Spike Lee. Spike Lee was never meant to be invisible in Crooklyn, 1994. Born on March 20, 1957 in Atlanta, Georgia, and raised in Brooklyn, Lee was 37 when he released the film and appeared briefly as Snuffy. But his true presence was everywhere. Crooklyn was not just another project, it was a reconstruction of his own childhood shaped by memory rather than nostalgia. Unlike his more confrontational films, this story moved quietly, letting domestic chaos, discipline, humor, and grief unfold without speeches or slogans. It revealed a different side of Lee, reflective, restrained, and deeply personal. By 1994, Spike Lee was already a lightning rod. Do the right thing. And Malcolm X had made him famous, but also controversial. Studios viewed him as talented yet difficult, outspoken yet risky. That pressure followed him into the period surrounding Crooklyn. While the film softened his tone, it did not soften the resistance he faced. Hollywood remained uncomfortable with his refusal to dilute black stories for broader approval. Financial backing, distribution battles, and critical framing were constant struggles even as his influence continued to grow. Lee married Tanya Lewis Lee in 1993, just 1 year before Crooklyn premiered. The timing mattered. His workload exploded, writing, directing, producing, teaching, public speaking, leaving little room for stillness. Though the marriage endured publicly, it unfolded under relentless motion. Creativity came first, often at personal cost. Lee has spoken about exhaustion not as burnout, but as a permanent condition, one shaped by decades of defending his work, his politics, and his right to tell stories without compromise. What does it cost to spend a lifetime in creative confrontation, never allowed the comfort of neutrality? Physically, Lee has avoided major public health crises, but the psychological toll of constant scrutiny is visible. Every film reopened old debates. Bamboozled Chirac and later Black Klansmen reignited arguments that followed him since the 1980s. Even success arrived with conflict. When he won his long-awaited Academy Award, it was framed less as celebration and more as overdue correction, proof of how long recognition had been withheld. By 2026, Spike Lee is 69 years old and still active. He continues directing, producing, and teaching while overseeing 40 Acres and a Mule Filmworks, the company he founded to retain creative control. His estimated net worth, around $60 million, reflects decades of persistence rather than comfort. It was earned through resistance, not ease. Looking back at Crooklyn now, Lee's appearance on screen feels symbolic. He wasn't acting so much as stepping into memory. 32 years later, what audiences see is not just how Spike Lee looks now, but what remains unchanged. A filmmaker who never stopped insisting that black life, in all its tenderness and contradiction, deserved to be told exactly as it was lived. Vondie Curtis Hall. Vondie Curtis Hall entered Crooklyn 1994 as a figure of balance. Born on September 30, 1950 in Detroit, Michigan, Curtis Hall was 44 when he played Uncle Brown, the steady presence who intervenes without spectacle. In a film defined by childhood chaos and adult pressure, his character offered something rare, calm authority. Uncle Brown didn't dominate scenes, he grounded them. That restraint mirrored Curtis Hall's broader career, measured adaptable and quietly influential. By the mid-1990s, Curtis Hall had already proven himself as a versatile performer. Roles on television and in film showcased a capacity for intelligence without theatrics, credibility without aggression. After Crooklyn, his visibility increased with work on Chicago Hope and films including Romeo plus Juliet. Yet at a moment when acting opportunities were cresting, he made a risky pivot. Rather than chase momentum, he stepped behind the camera to direct Gridlocked 1997, a project steeped in social realism and industry resistance. The transition demanded patience, not applause, learning new pressures, absorbing blame when projects struggled, and defending creative choices without the cushion actors often have. That shift coincided with major personal responsibilities. Curtis Hall married Cassie Lemons in 1995, and the balance between family life and reinvention was not glamorous. Directing requires long stretches of uncertainty development cycles without guarantees and reputational risk. For a black filmmaker in the 1990s, the margins were thinner still. Progress came incrementally shaped by resilience rather than momentum. Over time, Curtis Hall diversified rather than doubled down on a single lane. He returned to acting selectively, bringing authority to projects like Daredevil and Harriet, while also directing episodes across major television series. Teaching became an anchor. As a professor at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, he invested in craft and continuity mentoring students who would shape the next generation of storytelling. Education offered what the industry rarely does: stability, impact, and a legacy beyond credits. By 2026, Vondie Curtis Hall is 76 years old and still engaged, choosing projects with intention while remaining active in academia. His estimated net worth is about $4 million accumulated through decades of adaptability across acting, directing, and teaching. It reflects a career built to last rather than to spike. Looking back at Crooklyn from a distance of 32 years, Curtis Hall's Uncle Brown feels prophetic. He modeled the value of steadiness amid volatility. Today, when audiences compare how he looked then to now, the change is physical, but the through line remains. His work has always favored substance over noise, proving that longevity in American cinema can be earned quietly, one deliberate choice at a time. Joy Lee. Joy Lee occupied a complicated space in Crooklyn, 1994, both on screen and behind it. Born on June 22, 1962 in Brooklyn, New York. Lee was 32 years old when she portrayed Aunt Maxine, the stylish, outspoken relative whose presence injects humor, realism, and adult honesty into the children's world. Aunt Maxine is affectionate without being sentimental, loving without illusions. She speaks truths others avoid, grounding the film's warmth with lived experience. The performance felt effortless, yet it carried a weight shaped by Joy Lee's real position in cinema. By the time Crooklyn was released, Joy Lee was already navigating a lifelong contradiction, being an artist in her own right, while standing in the shadow of her younger brother, Spike Lee. She had appeared in Do the Right Thing and Mo Better Blues, but public perception often framed her work as proximity rather than merit. Every credit came with unspoken skepticism. That pressure was not loud or scandalous, it was persistent. Success risked dismissal. Absence risked invisibility. Rather than chasing constant screen presence, Lee gradually redirected her energy. She became increasingly involved behind the camera, co-writing and producing Crooklyn, a film rooted in shared family memory. This shift required relinquishing visibility in exchange for control. Writing and producing offered creative authority, but little public recognition, especially in the 1990s, when women, particularly black women, were rarely celebrated for off-screen leadership. The decision was strategic, not reactive. It allowed her to define success on her own terms. How different would Joy Lee's career be remembered if her last name hadn't already been famous? As the years passed, Lee chose selectivity over saturation. She appeared occasionally in films like Summer of Sam and Coffee and Cigarettes, but her focus increasingly leaned toward authorship, production, and documentary work. She published writing, explored themes of family, race, and identity, and remained engaged in independent cinema spaces where creative independence mattered more than box office metrics. This quieter phase favored longevity and personal voice over industry validation. By 2026, Joy Lee is 64 years old and still creatively active, though far from Hollywood's center. She continues to work as a writer and producer, maintaining privacy while preserving agency. Her estimated net worth is approximately $1.5 million, built steadily across decades rather than through headline moments. It reflects consistency, not spectacle. Looking back 32 years after Crooklyn, Joy Lee's transformation is subtle but telling. The vibrant aunt audiences remember remains frozen in time, while the woman behind her chose evolution without noise. Her legacy challenges a familiar narrative: not everyone survives Hollywood by staying visible. Some endure by stepping aside, safeguarding their voice, until it no longer needs permission to be heard. Chris Knowings. Chris Knowings carried a quiet gravity in Crooklyn, 1994, that often went unnoticed on first viewing. Born on February 25, 1980 in the Bronx, New York, Knowings was just 14 years old when he played Nate Carmichael, the eldest brother in a household defined by tension, discipline, and unpredictability. Nate was not the loudest child nor the most playful. He was the absorber, the one who watched, calculated, and stepped in when things felt close to breaking. That emotional restraint made the performance unusually mature for an actor so young. At the time, Knowings seemed poised for momentum. Crooklyn placed him at the emotional core of a critically respected film, and brief appearances followed, including work on New York Undercover. Yet unlike the Hollywood narrative that promises upward motion, his path slowed instead of accelerating. The industry's attention drifted, and the responsibility he portrayed on screen mirrored his real-life transition into adulthood under expectation rather than guidance. There were no public controversies or tabloid moments, only a gradual fading of opportunities that many former child actors quietly experience. As the years passed, the psychological weight of early responsibility lingered. Growing up on camera can freeze perception, locking an actor into a version of themselves audiences expect to see forever. For Knowings, remaining in front of the camera began to conflict with stability. Rather than forcing reinvention in an industry offering fewer doors, he made a strategic shift, one rooted in survival rather than surrender. The answer arrived years later in a different form. In 2007, Knowings joined Sesame Street as Chris Robinson, becoming part of one of America's most trusted educational institutions. The move marked a turning point. Voice work and children's programming offered consistency, creative fulfillment, and freedom from the physical scrutiny that had followed him since adolescence. His performances emphasized warmth, clarity, and reliability, qualities that aligned naturally with his temperament. On Sesame Street, Knowings found something rare in entertainment: longevity without volatility. His work earned him 2 Daytime Emmy nominations, recognition grounded in contribution rather than celebrity. The environment allowed him to remain creative while building a stable adult life, something many former child actors struggle to achieve. Voice acting also expanded his range, letting him age without being visually boxed into past roles. By 2026, Chris Knowings is 46 years old and continues working in voice acting and educational media. His estimated net worth is around $300,000, modest by Hollywood standards, yet reflective of a career reclaimed on his own terms. It represents steady income rather than sudden peaks, purpose rather than spectacle. Looking back at Crooklyn more than 3 decades later, Knowings' transformation is not dramatic, it's instructive. The boy who carried adult tension grew into a man who chose balance over visibility. When audiences compare how he looked then to now, they may notice age and distance from the spotlight. What they may miss is the success hidden in that choice, a life built not on chasing attention, but on sustaining it quietly, one meaningful role at a time. More than 3 decades after Crooklyn first captured a black childhood with painful honesty, Its cast reminds us that legacy isn't measured by fame alone. Some lives stretched across decades of endurance, others ended far too soon, and a few found peace by stepping away from the spotlight altogether. Yet every path reflects a different definition of survival, dignity, and success. So here's the real question we leave you with: is staying visible the only measure of greatness, or is choosing a quieter life sometimes the ultimate form of victory? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for stories that history often forgets but never truly loses.